Hello, again, Editor Sarah here. Welcome to part 2 of How Did Folklore Become Folklore, the video. As previously mentioned in part 1, I cut this in half because this seemed like the natural place to stop and the video is getting very, very long and quite difficult to edit. I apologise in advance, the sound quality is not great. When I originally recorded it, I have tried to fix it, but there are still some issues. But in spite of that, I hope you can enjoy it. And yeah, here we go. See you in a bit. So, at the time, my dear friend RoseMask22 and I had been working on an idea for a game in the background. It is the critically acclaimed dark fantasy visual novel Royal Duality, which is available on itch and Steam. And we kind of realised that if we were going to make this game together, actually the Panini was the perfect time to do it because we would have more time at home than ever, no need to commute from work and so on. Also, that game originally was going to be an Otome game, and we just realised that from a plot perspective, it would be really challenging to write that, so we changed it into a visual novel concept instead. Now, I had really low confidence in my art abilities after the Folklore 2 redrawings and just not being able to make it look good. And RoseMask is a superb artist, so I volunteered to write and program the game, project manage it and do the sound stuff, and not really draw anything. And I said that RoseMask could do all of the art stuff. It did help with the division of labour, and it did help us work with a frame of, you know, you have the responsibilities for the visuals, I have the responsibilities for the rest. Then we got some voice actors in, and that really elevated things in a way that I couldn't imagine. It taught me the importance of working with others. It made what we were doing more accessible and more equitable, and it really just made the characters come alive. So we finished that project and we released it, and that project taught me something really important, which was about big scopes and big long projects are not actually my forte from a writing perspective. So we identified characterization is a really good point for me. I'm really good at writing character scripts and dialogue, and I'm better at writing short form scenes than big, long, overarching stories. That's not to say that I can't write them, but doing them in smaller chunks seemed a bit more deliverable. And given my comics background and the episodic nature, that's not actually that surprising. So RoseMask and I worked on lots of projects together under the name Hyakuten Games. Link is somewhere. And for a couple of years, Folklore was put on the back burner. I also knew that the story was becoming dated, and I had tried to rewrite it several times and it just was not working. So I then saw in 2023 a game jam called Only One of Any Asset. I'll explain what that is in a moment. But when I saw this jam, I thought if I was going to try and bring back Folklore, a small little game might be the only way to reignite the spark. But I was constructively critical with myself, and I needed to go back to the beginning and think about what was good and what needed to change. And this is where Folklore had its turning point into the thing that it is now. The new Folklore. So I decided I had to shake up the entire premise. So Only One of Any Asset is a jam that has 1,000 words, one character sprite, one background, one piece of music, one sound effect. I looked at the Folklore comic and I had made some observations, and there are 4 of them. Number 1, Crooked had always been the most popular, so much so that he was called Crew-chan by some people who read the comics. Jack and Jill as well, they were quite popular. They had always sold the most merchandise. People were certainly the most interested in them. They were usually the only ones who sold out of merchandise. Number 2, Arthon was not the ideal protagonist anymore. Now, to clarify, an amnesic legend who is stuck between 2 worlds, it has a very specific shonen vibe, and given how much I enjoyed Yu-Gi-Oh!, which is still one of my favourite mangas by the way, I kind of realised that it's a really difficult thing to write, And it was really complicated for me to do it at that time, because every time I wrote Arthon after the amnesia period, he either came across as really self-righteous or really selfish. As his story progressed, he kind of just didn't feel like the original Arthon, but not in a satisfying way. You were kind of like, oh, he's just completely out of character now. Number 3, Jenny was surplus to the story functionally. Now, that's not Jenny's fault. I hadn't given her enough to do, and she was kind of just observing events and going, oh my goodness, and she was too passive to really have a meaningful part of the story. And the final one is a bit of a weird one. So because I was older, I felt like I couldn't write that story anymore because a lot of years had passed. It was probably a good 5 or 6 years. And Jenny and Arthon's struggles did not resonate with me anymore in an authentic way. They were much younger than me now at that point, and the world that they were living in didn't feel like the world that we live in now. I'm not old or bitter or anything, but respectfully, I can't write that story today because everything has changed too much, and I think for me it would have been a strain to write it. As I said at the beginning of the video, when you've got your lemons, you get your sugar and you make some lemonade. So we did have some opportunities with the new medium of visual novels, and there were 4 of those, which is number 1, I could take advantage of the things that I was good at in both writing and graphic presentation. So the VN genre suits character-led interactions in the way that I make them, and that was really good for me because it leans into my better writing qualities. And from a visual perspective, I could use pattern-dense, textured, coloured backgrounds, which is easier for me to do, and it actually helped me make something more aesthetically pleasing. Particularly for places like the Never Place, I could actually communicate the intention of it way better in a digital format than I could do in print. My other point is that I could flesh out the characters more by splitting the stories up. So the Folklore comics scope creep came because the characters were big and complicated, and so many of them were interesting in the comics, but none of their stories got explored enough. They didn't have enough time. They were just parts of the plot, in inverted commas. Games help with that a lot. Not that they're all equally received with the same amount of scrutiny or exposure, but I deeply felt that there are certain stories that really needed to be explored, and each person needs to be their own full character with their own situations and challenges. Culturally, the good thing about splitting up the story is it can move from place to place more easily. So, you know, they go from Japan, they're in Britain, they can go to wherever. New York is next on the list. It's not just limited to things in Britain anymore. Characters can split up and go do different things, and if you're interested, you can go play that game, or otherwise you cannot, and that's okay. My third point, so I can explore the interactive fiction elements, obviously, which you can't do with a comic. Now, I like interactive fiction because it helps stretch the player's concept of a character and get a glimpse of their extreme positives and their extreme negatives in behaviour. So, you know, what if Hacken did A? He went with Gregory. What if Hacken did B? And he went with his dad? I think exploring a character in that way to these extremes helps us figure out if we like them as an overall person in a really small amount of time. And being able to do that helps the player come to their own decisions. The narrative isn't leading them about do they like this person or not. They can make their own decisions about that. The way I had communicated in the comic, it was a very singular frame to explore, and the narrative was really pushing you around. You should like this person. You shouldn't like this person. And the final biggest contributing element of the VN kind of format is that you can use sound, you can use music, you can use voice acting. Now, all of those elements also make the story much more accessible to people who might have visual impairments or access needs. And I have a big passion for accessibility, and I wanted to make something that more people could connect with, that's more meaningful and equitable in terms of the experience. I am a musician, I really admire voice acting, and I really, really like sound design, so it gave me another element that I could enjoy in the production process. So I would say, if comics are sequential art, visual novels are like digital theatre, and that leans into a lot of things that I really enjoy. The big changes to make the new medium happen, there were 3 things. Number 1, reframing the narrative. The Crooked Man was the protag now, spacing the characters out through time and space made easier for us to get to know them in their own context without them having to fight and compete with each other with like who's the best character. Number 2, this story is a lot less black and white from a moral perspective. You know, they're quite complicated characters. Pandemonium isn't villain coded despite what the characters say. Tia says he's a hero, but the narrative is kind of like, he doesn't seem like one. I think that there's something about the world changing, people having more open points of view, not being told what to think in media. It's like, make your own opinions, form your own thoughts, and, you know, have discourse and talk about those things. That's cool, and we should do it more. And the final big change was to make the player an active participant in the story, because this isn't a comic anymore. We don't need a Jenny. We're either playing as the apprentice, who is like a self-insert for those who want to do that, or, you know, you can choose to just be a default apprentice. There is a name in the game if you want to do that, and it's a different name for every installment. Little tidbit there. But also, even when you're not playing as the apprentice, if you're playing as Morrigan or if you're playing as Robert, you are actively making decisions that are going to change either the outcome of the story or the way an interaction goes. There are consequences to being a participant in the story. They might be rewards, they might be detractions, but they do add a flavour to the experience for the player. Am I happy with what I've made? Absolutely, yes. I was amazed that anybody even played Do You Like Sweets? The comic, which had been so difficult, that had been hard to sell, you know, people picked up this game and they streamed it, and I couldn't believe it, and I still can't believe it, and it did really well in the Only One of Any Asset Jam. And I think that part of this is because this is what I had intended to make in 2009, but I didn't know how to articulate it. The technology wasn't there. The collaboration was different back then. But the series, as it's progressed, is really about going around the world and encountering all of these different folk tales. So it's really delivered on what I always wanted it to be. I do think Do You Like Sweets touched on people's tastes, pardon the pun. But the folklore story, as it progresses, it becomes niche. And I can understand that kooky Crooked Man japes in the sweet shop was where people thought it was going based off the first game, but that was not the intended direction of travel. I wasn't exactly deceptive with that, but I think people saw something that was maybe different than what I was intending with the series. It can be quite a challenging text at times, it can be quite pensive, it does require a bit of go and think about that thing that you've just played, and that is not for everyone, and I think that's fine. Do I miss what I had? So that's an interesting question. There is a tiny population of people in the world, somewhere in the north of England, who have Folklore Comic Book 1 and the character guide. There were probably a few digital readers I expect from around the world, and they probably look at the visual novel series and think, Lord, what is happening in there? Like Superintendent Chalmers in The Simpsons. So I feel a little guilty towards those people who might have liked the original version of that world, but if I'm going to be candid, I think that the old characters have seen improvements because they've had more attention, they have better motivations, they're more complicated, they have a bigger world to function in where there's more on the line, and there's a lot more diversity in the cultures and the places that they go to. The new characters that are in it have purpose, they have stories of their own, no one's a background guy. Even if characters don't have a lot of screen time, they really feel like they're bringing something to the story and they exist in their own world. One thing I would say is that visual novels are as much effort as comics, but I feel like I'm dealing with tools and techniques that I can handle better in the visual novel medium. So production speed has increased quite a lot, which is good because it helps me deliver the story in a more timely way, and it enables me to think about those side stories that I want to explore, which again, I couldn't do in the comic format. So what's coming up is probably worth addressing. The story is in its final third now. There are a few side stories I could explore. If you have burning desires, tell me what you're interested in seeing in the comments. But things that are coming up so that you can belay your comments are as follows. So, who are Dracane and Arthon, the guardians of the Nether Place from Only When You Sleep? What actually happened to Robert? We know that he opened a box and we know that he discovered the Mythic Court secrets, but what are those? Why are Tyr and Gregory the way they are? What connection do they have together? They both think about Arthon and Dracane, so what's all that about? Is Siraj okay? Last time we saw him, we kind of felt like he wasn't, but he's Siraj, so maybe there's something else going on. Is the Crooked Man okay? Is he good? Is he not good? Who is this new Adam Blackwood? He seems kind of important. And I guess the final question, will Pandemonium actually bring John home? So in conclusion, what did I learn in the shift between mediums? Number 1, be kind to yourself and your previous efforts. Things are often a product of the circumstances, the time, the materials that you had available. Don't hate what you did, but recognise if there needs to be some improvements, which leads on to point 2, which is about truths. If you need to mix something up or change it, you might have to be quite radical with that. But if it means you're going to stay positive and have good energy about the thing that you're doing, sometimes it is worth making that big leap. You need to know what was good about the thing that you had, you need to know what the challenges were, and you need to know what things are going to motivate you for the long haul. I would say challenge yourself with the question, what is the best version of this thing that I could possibly make? Number 3, even when you're working alone, you're not actually working alone. So when I was making the Folklore comics, I felt alone, but I was venting frustrations. People were buying the comic, people were enjoying the thing that I made. It can feel lonely, but you're not actually working on your own. And for visual novels, that's even more true because there's voice actors, there's testers, there are streamers, and you're kind of all working on making that thing great, so you're not on your own. Point 4, not every part will be received equally. Some characters will be fan favourites. Some characters might not get that same level of love, and that's cool because it's nice to find out things that were unexpectedly popular, but it's also nice in your knowledge that you made every character as important as the other in your own mind. And finally, I think that nearly everything can be improved. I think there are very few things that are totally unsalvageable. So if you made something in the past and you're like, oh, that's a non-starter, I don't think I can ever do anything with that, it seems like you can, or at least I could. So I hope that might motivate you to pick up something that you abandoned and maybe give it another shot. Well, friends, thanks for listening to me ramble today. I appreciate it. Hope that this was interesting, and if you have any deep, burning folklore story thoughts, any questions about why does Jill think the Crooked Man swallowed a mouthful of bees, let me know. Reach out to me anywhere. I do love to talk, especially about this series, a little bit too much. Thank you everybody, take care, and remember, have a sweeter day to keep pandemonium away.